Hello everybody. Today's topic is on principles of learning. The objective of this lesson is to understand the principles of learning and to understand the implications of principles of learning to education. Module 1, Introduction. Learning is a process of actively constructing knowledge. Therefore, the teachers, administrators, they have the responsibility to create environment and plan experiences that foster inquiry, questioning, predicting, exploring, collecting, educational play and communicating. Learning engages learners in experiences that encourage their personal construction of knowledge, for example, hands-on, minds-on, science, math, drama, creative movement, artistic representation, writing and talking to learn. It should provide learners with experiences that actively involve them, and personally it should be meaningful. Students construct knowledge and make it meaningful in terms of their prior knowledge and experiences. Therefore, the teachers and administrators have the responsibility to find out what students already know and what they can do. They need to create learning environment and plan experiences that build on learners' prior knowledge and ensure that learners are able to see themselves reflected in learning materials used in the school. Recognize, value and use of great diversity of experiences and information the students bring to the school and providing learning opportunity that respect and support the students' racial, cultural and social identities. Student should be invited or challenged to build prior knowledge integrating new understanding within the existing understandings. Learning is enhanced when it takes place in a social and collaborative environments. Therefore, the teacher and the administrators, they have the responsibility to ensure that talk, group work, collaborative ventures are central to the class activities. And it should be seen that learners have a frequent opportunities to learn from and with others. And students need to continue to view learning as integrated whole. Therefore, the teachers and administrators, they have the responsibility to plan opportunities to help the student make connections across the curriculum and with the whole world outside and structure activities that require students to reflect on those connections. Students should be able to apply the strategies from across the curriculum to solve the problems of real situation. So, let us see the principles of learning. Module 2, the principles of learning, the theory and research based. The basic principles of learning that underlie effective learning, and these principles have been distilled from research from variety of disciplines. The first principle is that the students' prior knowledge can help or hinder learning. Students come into the class with knowledge, beliefs, attitudes gained from other courses of life and also through daily life. As a student brings this knowledge to the classrooms, it influences how they filter and interpret what they are learning. If students' prior knowledge is robust and accurate and activated at appropriate time, it provides a strong foundation for building new knowledge. However, when the knowledge is inert, insufficient for the task activated inappropriately or inaccurate, it can interfere with or impede new learning. How students organize knowledge influences how they learn and apply what they know. Students naturally make connections between the pieces of knowledge. When those connections from the knowledge structures that are accurate, and meaningfully organized, the students are better able to retrieve and apply their knowledge effectively and efficiently. In contrast, when the knowledge is connected, inaccurate or in random ways, the student can fail to retrieve or apply it inappropriately. The third one is that the student's motivation determines the direction and sustains what they do to learn. When the student enters the school, they gain a great autonomy over what, when and how they study and learn. Motivation, it plays a critical role in guiding the direction, intensity and persistence and quality of the learning behavior in which students are engaging themselves. When the students find positive value in a learning goal or activity, they expect to successfully achieve a desired learning outcome and they perceive support from their environment and they are likely to be strongly motivated to learn. The fourth principle is to develop mastery. The student must acquire component skills, practice integrating them and know when to apply what they have learned. The student must develop not only the competent skills and knowledge necessary for performing complex tasks, they must also practice combining, integrating them to develop a greater fluency, automaticity. Finally, the students must learn when and how to apply the skills and knowledge they have learned. As a teacher, it is important that we develop a conscious awareness of these elements of mastery so as to help the students learn more effectively. Goal directed practice coupled with targeted feedback enhances the quality of students' learning. Learning and performance, they are best fostered when the student engage in practice that focus on a goal or criteria and targets an appropriate level of challenge and is of sufficient quantity and frequency to meet the criteria. Practice must be coupled with feedback that explicitly communicates about some aspects of the student's performance in relation to the specific target criteria. It should provide information to help the students progress in meeting those criteria and is given at a time and a frequency that allows it to be more useful for the student learning to be effective. Then the next principle is the student's current level of development interacts with the social, emotional and intellectual climate of the course to impact the learning. Students are not only intellectual, but also social and emotional beings and they still are developing the full range of intellectual, social and emotional skills. While we cannot control the developmental process, but we can shape the intellectual, social, emotional and physical aspects of the classroom climate in developmentally appropriate ways. In fact, many studies have shown that climate we create has implications for our students. A negative climate may impede learning and performance, but a positive climate can energize the students' learning. The next principle is to become self-directed learners. The student must learn to monitor and adjust their approaches to learning. Learners may engage in a variety of native processes to monitor and control their learning, assessing the task at hand, evaluating their own strengths and weaknesses and planning their approach, applying and monitoring various strategies reflecting on the degree to which their current approach is working. Unfortunately, the students tend not to engage in these processes naturally. When students develop the skills to engage these processes, they gain intellectual habit that not only improve their performance, but also their effectiveness as learners. So, these are some of the principles on the basis of the research in variety of disciplines. Now, let us look at principles of learning. Module 3, Principles of Learning. Educational psychology and educational psychologists, they have identified several principles of learning and referred to them as laws of learning, which seem generally applicable to the learning process. These principles have been discovered, tested and used in practical situations. They provide additional insight to what makes people learn most effectively. Thorndike developed the first 3 laws, which is called the laws of learning: law of readiness, law of exercise and effect. The principles of learning, also known as laws of learning, which are readiness, exercise, effect, primacy, recency, intensity and freedom. This will be explained in great general. So, first one is the readiness. Readiness, it implies a degree of willingness, eagerness of an individual to learn something new. Individuals learn best when they are physically, mentally, emotionally ready to learn, and they do not learn if they see no reason for learning. Getting the students ready to learn, creating interest by showing the value of the subject, providing continuous physical or mental challenge is usually the responsibility of the teacher. Since learning is an active process, the student must have adequate rest, health and physical comfort while learning. Next comes exercise. The principle of exercise, it states that those things that are most often repeated are the ones that are best remembered. The student will learn best and retain the information longer when they have meaningful practice and repetition. It is clear that practice leads to improvement only when it is followed by a positive feedback. The human mind is forgetful and it can rarely retain and evaluate and apply new concepts or practices after a single exposure. Students will not learn complex tasks in a single session. They learn by applying what they have been told or shown. Every time when the practice occurs, learning continues. The teacher must repeat important items of the subject matter at a reasonably intervals and provide opportunities for the students to practice while making sure this process is directed towards learning something. The next principle after readiness and exercise is effect. The principle of effect is that learning is strengthened when accompanied by a pleasant or satisfying feeling. Effect. The principle of effect is that learning is strengthened when accompanied by pleasant or satisfying feeling, and that learning is also weakened when it is associated with a unpleasant feeling. The learner will strive to continue learning as long as it is providing a pleasant effect. Positive reinforcement is more likely to lead to success and motivate the learner. So, the teacher recognizes this future and tells the students how well they are doing, which is one of the important obligations of the teacher is to set up learning situation in such a manner that each person being taught will be able to see the evidence of their own progress and achieve some degree of success. The next principle of primacy. Primacy is, it is the state of being first. Often it creates a strong impression which may be very difficult to change. Things learned first create a strong impression in the mind that is difficult to erase. Unteaching or erasing from the mind the incorrect first impressions is harder than teaching them correctly in the first place. The learner's first experience should be therefore positive, functional, and it should be able to lay a foundation for all that is to be followed. As a teacher, it should be represent that the subject matter should be presented in a logical order, step by step, making sure that the student has already learned and understood the preceding steps. Next principle is recency. The principle of recency states that the thing most recently learned are best remembered. Conversely, a learner is removed the time wise from the new fact or understanding, the more difficult it is to remember. For example, if a student is asked about the information which was presented to him one day before, he can immediately recall. But if the student is asked about the information or learning that has happened last 1 week, then it will not be, the student may not be able to produce the result. So, the information acquired more recently is generally remembered at best, and frequent review or summarizing will be helpful in fixing the student's mind topics that have been already covered. To that end, the teacher should remember to repeat, restate or re-emphasize the important points at the end of the lesson to help the students remember them. Intensity. The more intense the material taught, the more likely it will be retained. A sharp, clear, dramatic or exciting learning experiences the teachers more than a routine and boring experience. The principle of intensity implies that a learner will learn more from the real thing than from a substitute. Likewise, a learner is likely to gain greater understanding of the task by performing them rather than merely reading about them. The more the immediate and dramatic the learning is to a real situation, the more impressive the learning is upon the learner. The next principle is freedom. The principle of freedom states that things freely learned are best learned. Conversely, if the student is forced to learn something, the more difficult it is for them to learn. Compulsion and forcing, they are not favorable for personal growth. If, for example, if you force a student to learn something, then he may not be able to learn it correctly. But if you are motivating them through giving the correct opportunities, the correct results from that learning, then the student will learn freely and appropriately in a correct way. Module 4, Factors Affecting Learning. The factors that affect learning can be categorized into 4 categories: physiological factors, psychological factors, environmental factors and teaching methodology. The first factor is the physiological factors. Physiological factors include how people feel, their physical health, their levels of fatigue at the time of learning and the quality of food or drink they have consumed, their age, etc. All these come under the physiological factors. Physical health is important because ill health hampers learning and so can fatigue. Studying for a longer time can cause fatigue, which affects the student's learning capacity. So, the time of learning also influences how much the knowledge is acquired. The quantity and quality of the healthy food or nutrition becomes a crucial part which is responsible for efficient mental activity. When the nutrition is poor, it adversely affects the learning. Sometimes the kind of food we take also has adverse effect on the capacity to learn. Good physiological factors promote effective learning. Next comes the psychological factors. If a student is anxious or worried, they will not be able to learn very effectively. Psychological factors such as mentally ill health or tension or conflict all hamper learning. A related psychological factor, motivation, it is without which learning cannot happen. So, in absence of motivation, learning cannot be happening. Purposeless learning is not learning at all. Motivation, it energizes, it selects and directs toward positive behavior when learning can occur at the peak. Then comes the environmental factors. The key environmental factors when delivering educational messages or when teaching new things are the conditions where the learners have to sit to do their learning. Learning can be hampered by bad environmental conditions like noise, crowdedness, the darkness of the classroom. All these are some of the environmental factors which can hamper the learning situation in a classroom. So, these are about the principles of learning. Module 5, Guidelines for Effective Learning. After understanding the principles of learning, the laws of learning and the factors affecting learning, let us now look at the guidelines for effective learning. Learning principles are the guidelines for the ways in which people learn most effectively. The more the principles are reflected in the training or in the classroom, the more effective the training is likely. So, let us look at some of the guidelines. They are participation, repetition, relevance, transference and feedback. First one is the participation. Learning should permit and encourage active participation of the learner. Participation, it improves motivation and apparently engages more senses which reinforce the learning process. As a result of participation, people or the students can learn more quickly and retain what has been learnt. For example, all the children never forget or any individual never forgets how to ride a bicycle because they have actively participated in that learning process. So, the learning activities should be experiential rather than just informational. Therefore, the teacher should arrange physical surroundings to facilitate small group interactions and promote sharing of ideas and actively having the student participate in the learning process. Repetition. An important principle of learning is to provide the learner with the opportunity of practice and repetition. To gain the full benefit of a classroom learning, the learned behavior must be overlearned to ensure smooth performance and minimum of forgetting at a later date. Proficiency in learning and retaining new skills is improved when individuals visualize themselves performing the new behavior. The next guideline is relevance. Learning is helped when the material to be learned is meaningful. Learning always should be problem centered rather than content centered. People are motivated to learn when the learning is immediately relevant to help them solve some current problems. Learning something just because someone says it is important is not motivating. It should be relevant to day life situations. The next principle is or the next guideline is transference. Because learning can occur in a special environment, an important question to ask whether learning will transfer the new information to the actual situation. Transfer of training or transfer of knowledge occurs when the students can apply the knowledge and skills learned during their course to actual life situations. If the learning in one setting does not transfer to the actual situation, then the learning has failed. There are three kinds of transferring the knowledge that can be possible. The first one is positive transfer of knowledge when the learning activities enhance the performance in new situations. The second one is negative transfer of knowledge when the learned activities inhibit the performance in a new situation. And the third one is no observable effect of the learning. The next guideline is feedback. Feedback gives the learners information on their progress. The performance feedback is necessary prerequisite for learning to happen. Feedback improves the performance not only by helping learners to to correct their mistakes, but also provides a reinforcement for learning. Knowledge of results is positive reinforcement in itself. Learning activities have more intrinsic interest if the feedback is available. Nevertheless, performance feedback should be more than informing learners whether they were right or wrong. So, today we have seen in the principles of learning and their implications to a educational setting or a classroom setting. We have understood what are the principles on the basis of theory and research in different sections of the curriculum, and also we have learned what are the factors for the learning to happen which can strengthen or weaken the learning, and also we have understood like what are the guidelines for effective learning. So, we can conclude this lesson by knowing that the learners must see themselves as capable and successful. Therefore, as a teachers, as administrative of a preschool, we have a responsibility to provide activities, resources and challenges that are developmentally appropriate to the learner, and communicate high expectations for achievement to all the students and encourage taking risk in learning. It is required to ensure that all students experience genuine success on regular basis and value experimentation and treat approximation as a signs of growth. Providing frequent opportunities for the students to reflect on and describe what they can and what they know, and the student should be provided learning experience and resources that reflect diversity of local and global community and provide learning opportunities that develop self-esteem. Learners have different ways of knowing and representing knowledge. So, the teachers and administrators have the responsibility to recognize each learner's preferred ways of constructing the meaning and provide opportunity for exploring the knowledge in alternative ways. So, planning a wide variety of experiences, assessment strategies, recognizing and acknowledgement builds on the students' diverse way of knowing and representing their knowledge. So, having a frequent opportunities for the student to use various forms like music, drama, visual arts, dance, movements, crafts as a means of exploring, formulating and expressing their ideas. I hope you have understood the lesson. Thank you.